Welcome back to another episode of Buckle Up, an ultra running conversation with Simon and Brian. Simon, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. I think the last few episodes I was like, oh, my knees. My knees are fine now, actually, which is a great feeling. I took the rest. I went slower for a little bit, and now I'm back at full training, which feels absolutely fantastic. How about yourself? How are your knees?
Knees are good. I'm back in the full swing. I actually got my hair cut yesterday, which really signifies for me full training mode now. That's usually I cut off the winter hair, even though it was only 10 degrees here today. I cut off the winter hair. That's I'm in the zone. I'm ready to train.
That's awesome. And you're wearing proudly your Boston Marathon shirt,
Oh,
which
this
I'll never
old shirt?
get.
This old one here? This old shirt?
Yes.
Actually, it was twofold. It was twofold because I feel like my background is really dark all the time, so I was like, oh, I should wear brighter colors. And then I saw this one, and my Cocodona shirt's dirty, so I took this one out.
And as any other guys, we only have race shirt. That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
There's
That's it.
another
Well, at least
option.
brightly colored ones. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair
Um,
enough.
Thinking of Boston, though, and qualifying, we just had a conversation with Jason B from RunTryMag.com, and we talk about the struggles with marathon training and all the other things that Run Try Magazine are doing.
Yeah, it was great catching up with Jason. So um, that is an episode that is a little bit related to our episode with that we had a while back. So they're running that together. I think they're three partner doing the Run Try magazine. I'm sorry if I butchered the name, but great thing where they do a lot of different content, different format, podcasts, shorter podcasts, different discussion, and interviewing people, ordinary people like you and I that have a story, which I think is always worth telling. And we definitely talked a little bit about that. Also, how Jason got into the sport, which started a little bit with not qualifying for Boston, which is exactly the same for me.
That's right. Jason shares a bit about Run Try Mag and how he tells the story of the everyday athlete. We're not talking about the tip of the spear, and we're not talking about the top 10 podium guys, golden ticket winners, or anything like that. We're talking about mid-packers, relatable athletes like you and I that are not getting paid to do this, that have regular lives, have regular jobs, and have, I'm sure the front of the pack has hobbies outside of running, but sometimes it doesn't seem that way. But definitely the mid-pack, we're just everyday people, and we have a ton of things going on in our lives other than running.
Yeah, and I think the pace at which you finish a race really doesn't indicate how much of a story you have to tell and how much background um, actually led you to be on that starting line. And we are on this channel or on this podcast, we had pretty charged episode with people that had a quite big story as to getting to that starting line. I mean, the Shanna John for Cocodona, for example, I think it is a very touching episode. And yeah, of course she didn't win Cocodona, but that's really not the point. And I think she really had a story of courage to discuss. We had the same with Lorena that did Angela's Crest, breast cancer survivor. Obviously, these girls didn't win. They didn't think they would win, but they finished and they did something absolutely incredible. And I think sharing their story is something that can inspire other people to have their own adventure, to push their own limit, and to realize that this is not just for pro athletes, but it's also for people, everyday people, really.
That's right. The front of the group, the podium is only 3, 4, 5 deep, and there are hundreds of finishers behind them. And those are the everyday athletes. Those are the stories that we're telling most of the time on our channel. It's the story that Run Try Mag is telling across multiple channels, different platforms. They're spreading their media, and they're meeting people at where they consume the media, which is a lot of work, and they do it full time. I think just like you mentioned, I think there's 3 of them that are doing it full time. And so it's a great conversation with Jason to catch up with them. We also share that we'll all be at Javelina, and Jason invited you to come by and check out his tent, hang out and say hi. If you're there this year. So we look forward to that in October. And without further ado, here's Jason B from RunTryMag.com. Enjoy. Hey, Jason, thanks for taking some time this evening out of your night to sit down and talk with Simon and I. Thanks for being here.
No, thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasant surprise to get the email to be on your guys' show, so I really appreciate it.
Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself for our audience. We know each other from just a few years ago, I think, or just more recently, maybe in the last couple of years, post-COVID maybe. But otherwise, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah, so I have been in endurance sports for 18 years now. Started with the half marathon, made my way through triathlon, Ironman events, found my way into trail running and ultra running, eventually wound up going, the multi-day event at Cocodona. And so it's just been a part of my life from, when I was, mid 30s, but I've been an athlete my whole life playing all the major sports, basketball, football, baseball, that kind of stuff. Always been athletic, always been competitive. And over time, I've been able to take my passion for endurance sports and create a company out of it that gets to talk more about endurance sports and the stories that are inside of these sports, which I think are great. We've shared stories of both of you guys on our platform, have developed friendships from it, which has been fantastic. Brian left out the key component of our friendship was 2 years ago, to cross the years, he brought me an Impossible Whopper while I was doing the last person standing event, which was fantastic. It's one of the pictures that's floating around the internet these days. So thank you for that. Thank you for the nourishment back then. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I guess if you want to go all the way back, and one of the reasons why Run Try Bike exists today is I'm a Puerto Rican kid born in the Bronx who had no clue what running was in terms of running miles or 100 miles. Triathlon was not a topic of conversation amongst, my friends when we were in the Bronx. We were more about playing baseball. My father was a huge boxing fan, so I was a huge boxing fan. And I made my way, from the Bronx into college, eventually got my master's degree in finance at Iona College in New Rochelle, New York. So, there's a little bit of brains behind this pretty face too.
So you're finance bro. I didn't realize that.
A little bit of a finance bro. It's funny, like people will say, well, what did you do with your degree? And I was like, protect my investments. I learned how to read 10K reports and things like that so that I can have an opportunity to retire sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, I work in management consulting a little bit. So what I do is I create value and make sure we make the right decision, by
Yeah.
leveraging all of our assets. So yes.
Yeah. I mean, knowledge is power, right?
Knowledge is power. Yes, that is correct. Yes. For people that are not too deep in that world, we just said nothing really. Nothing but everything. Now we can charge you $2,000. Like that's what it is, really.
Hire us
I'm
as
ready to be a
consultants if you
partner,
need.
You guys are open to work, right? Like you're open
Yes,
to.
100%. I'll put that on my LinkedIn account right after this show.
Yes. I'm recovered, by the way, for anyone wondering. I've been away from that world for a few years now, so I'm good. I barely use it, like the word leveraging, like almost never. I almost never leverage the word leverage.
I thought you just used it in the email today, didn't you?
That was not the case. I'm not even sure I can say what I said in my email in the podcast that would be broadcast on the internet. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
It was very
We'll talk about it offline. But
Yes.
Jason, the story about the Whopper was, I think you had mentioned, like, man, I saw you that morning and you said, I was volunteering, you were racing, and you said something like, man, I'd go for like an Impossible Whopper. Oh, I was going to town. And I went
Yep.
and ran on the Dells, I think it is, or the Whites. I can't remember what range of mountains is in there. But I drove 30 minutes. I went for a big run. And I didn't even think about it. It was kind of like a thought in my head. But I was driving and like out of nowhere, like cha-ching, like the Burger King was there, and I was like, oh man, Jason wanted an Impossible Whopper, so I got 2 Impossible Whoppers. I thought I'd give myself some sodium replacement as well with the
It was
Impossible Whopper.
golden, dude. Like, and I had just said it because you were pulling out in your truck. And I was like, oh, where you going? You're like, oh, I'm going to go for a run and then go into town. I was like, oh, on your way back, just bring an Impossible Whopper, just, bullshitting with you about it. And sure enough, man, there it was. And there's a picture floating on the internet, I'm telling you. And the shit-eating grin I have from eating that Impossible Whopper, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I had my across the year story this year. Mandy, which we had on the podcast, I can't remember the number of episodes, but Mandy from Windsor, I wanted some fries, and they got me some fries from Chick-fil-A. So I don't know, across the year is a place to, I don't know, have fast food. It's great. I really appreciate the community supporting each other like that.
that Chick-fil-A is literally, a handful of steps away from the ballpark that they have
So they didn't
across
do
the
me a
years at
big
right now.
favor.
I mean, they did you a favor, but it wasn't like they had to drive across the city for it.
Well, I really appreciate it.
Sorry,
Just
Manny,
for
for
the
ruining your story.
Yeah. Just for the record, though, Aravipa does a great job with their aid station, and their aid
Yes.
station is full of food. You don't need to get fast food at across the years, but just for the record, so we don't get in trouble. So
And
we
they
can
actually
all
had
show
a-
up
they
for
were-
this year, for the next year's across the year, so we could all still
Yeah.
show up for that one.
Yeah.
They had a coffee truck at this one this year, and the coffee was really good too, by the way.
That's awesome. Jason, you grew up in the Bronx. There's a huge event in Queens that, it's kind of like, what is it? It's the 3000, the Transcendent 3000. They run around the compound in Queens for 3,000 miles. It takes like half the summer or something along
Yes.
those lines. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah? You know what I'm
I've
talking
just
about?
heard about this just recently, as a matter of fact. Maybe in the last 3 weeks I heard about it.
Oh, wow.
And-
Recently, yeah.
Yeah, like super recent. Again, I grew up in the Bronx, dude. We played baseball, like running 3,000 miles? Like, no chance. We don't want to run 90 feet to first base, let alone 3,000 miles. But yeah, like in the last 3 weeks, I read about this thing, and it's crazy. And it's ironic because just before that, we had Cameron Balzer on the Beyond the Finish Line show with Joe Harden, who ran the perimeter of the 1,000 miles. And, look, I did Cocodona. You guys have done multiple day events, 200 plus milers. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of sacrifice. And this idea of running 3,000 or 12,000 miles, like it's impossible, honestly, right now to wrap my head around it. The logistics, the timing, just all of it, to do all of that. It's amazing to even consider it, and let alone participate in it.
Yeah, I mean, if I would be running 3,000 mile, I think I would do the AT or the PCT. I would not be running in the Bronx, honestly. Like
Queens,
that would be my biggest.
Queens. Yeah. It's
Queens,
in Jamaica,
sorry.
Queens. Yeah.
I mean,
I think it's in Jamaica.
either way, I wouldn't do it in either location. I wasn't trying to shade the location more. I would go across the country, not
Something a little
in
more
tiny
scenic. Yeah.
movements. Yeah. So it's
I
very
think,
impressive.
It's actually crazy because I think there's like a window, like midnight to 6 a.m. that the neighborhood becomes unsafe, and you're like you can't run, so you're forced to sleep for 6 hours or do something else for 6 hours, and probably replenish, hydrate, fix your feet, and sleep, hopefully, before you get up and do it again. And and these guys are going day after day for 3,000 miles. I don't even know what the number would be. 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, something like that. And it's pretty warm and stuffy in the city if you haven't been there
Yeah.
in July and August. It's not your cool ocean breeze that Simon's getting there in California right now.
No, it's humid as all get out in New York City in the summer and that time of the year. So it's brutal. Yeah, they have some actually really cool events in New York City. So they have, I think it's called TFNY, Tour of New York. It's a 100-miler. You have to, write into the guy to get submitted into the event, and it's 100 miles through the city. And then they have one. Have you guys ever seen the movie The Warriors, where the gang event, right?
Yeah.
So there's a race that follows that same exact path, through city and ending at Coney Island and stuff like that. And that's one I absolutely need to find my way into. Michelle Goldberg, who I think you guys know, has either run it or she knows people that run the event itself. So one day I'm going to reach out to her and be like, you got to get me into the event, because if you're a child of the 70s, the movie came out in 79. It's called The Warriors, and you just know it. You know it as part of, growing up in New York in that area. And it would be phenomenal to participate in an event like that.
Just as an FYI for those listeners, if you are going to watch it, it's probably not a kid-friendly movie.
Oh, it's
You
definitely
probably
not.
don't want your not like a family-friendly movie. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. It's inner city gangs, cities
Yes.
like I don't know. The gangs are all like themed out, and they're
Yes.
just insane and crazy, and they're it's kind of an off-the-wall type of
Yeah.
like an Agent Orange type of
Clockwork Orange. Yeah.
Clockwork Orange, Clockwork Orange type of type of movie. Yeah. When did you leave there to get? And where are you at now?
So I'm in LA right now. I left New York about, 17 years ago. I lived in Dallas for 12 or 13 years. I've lived in Phoenix for a couple of years, lived in Seattle, and now we're in LA, just outside of LA, really. And let me tell you something. If you have a chance to travel, this country and go to different places to get your running on, take advantage of it. The running you do in New York, because that's where I started running, is different than the running in Texas, is different than the running in Arizona, is different than the running in the PNW. I get to run on the beach now, right, on the Strand in Hermosa and Manhattan Beach, and the view is just phenomenal there. If you honestly, if you get the chance to see this, or honestly any part of the world on 2 feet, take advantage of it. Like, it's unbelievable the experiences that you can have and the memories you can create for a lifetime by running, hiking, walking in different areas. Like, just don't go to the hotel room and sit there. Get outside.
Totally agree. I mean, I think for me being non-American, what I love here is the variety that you get in terms of landscape is just absolutely astounding. That the Southwest, like Utah, Zion, is totally different if you go in the Northwest, or you have so much variety that it's worth traveling. I'm curious, where's your favorite running?
Right now, I would say the PNW. Running in Seattle in that area was absolutely gorgeous. Seeing the fall leaves change, and it's cool, but it doesn't get cold in Seattle. It barely snows. I think it snowed 1 or 2 days, and it was melted before it hit the ground, so you don't have to deal with that either. And so you're up in the mountains, you have cool crisp air, you've got the fall leaf change, you have the pine trees, and the trails themselves are soft. Like in Arizona, because you guys have both run there, that stuff is hard as shit, man. Like if you trip and fall in Arizona, it's gonna hurt. Whereas when you do it in the PNW, it's pine needles and it's some soft dirt. If you trip and fall, it's not awful.
I mean, my strategy, by the way, is to not fall down when I run. I mean, thinking outside of the box here, but that's what I try to do. But totally agree. I mean, even just impact for knees and ankles, like it makes a difference. Like I noticed for me, javelina or cold water, I feel the trail are pretty hard, and I feel it in my joint much more than if I run something like Rocky Raccoon or like I did long haul now, and it's really soft the whole way. And you don't notice when you're walking or running 5 miles, but for 100 miles, it definitely makes a difference for sure. So totally agree.
Yeah, I raced Coldwater. I think that was my second 100 miler I ever did, and we've had PJ Mortimer on our show a couple of times, and he mentioned he raced Coldwater the same year I did, and I was like, oh really? So I looked up the ultra sign up, and I crack jokes with him now because he beat me only by like 11 minutes, right? And we're now on two totally different ends of the spectrum now, and I was like, well, if I would have just kept going the way you did, who knows what might have happened back then. But you're right. The running in Coldwater I've raced Rocky Raccoon 5 times myself, and it's just completely different. Your body doesn't ache as much on the terrain that you get at like a Rocky or in the Pacific Northwest type of thing. It's definitely easier on the body that way.
I was living in Midtown Manhattan, and back in the day in 97, 98, and I was trying to train in Central Park. I mean, it was the park, right? I mean, it's the place to run. They have New York Road Runners Club and the whole thing going on. There's pace groups and every 10-minute increment you could ever imagine, and all different distances. And you meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you go out and run with the groups, right? And I just thought, man, I'm living life, right? And I showed up into Colorado to visit a friend, and I realized, man, there's a small town and there's just miles of running. And I was like, man, I think I've got this wrong, and I've never left. So I've just stayed here in Colorado, like legitimately right here in the same town.
The thing that people don't realize about Central Park is it's hilly. It has, varying terrain in terms of elevation there. That if you're like, oh, I'll just go around Manhattan, and you think it's all totally flat, like you get into Central Park and you're like, holy crap, man, there's a lot more climbing than I thought.
Did you ever run New York City Marathon?
I've never run the New York City Marathon, but I've run plenty of miles around Central Park. Yeah.
That was my first official world major, I guess, intentionally, because I didn't want to spoil it. I wanted New York to be my first one because I'm from back east as well. I grew up just outside of New York City and spent a lot of time in Midtown area, and so yeah, I loved it. It was great.
I swore off marathons somewhere around 2010, 2011. I ran the Las Vegas Rock and Roll. It was their first time having it at night, and I was like, I'm going to try to qualify for Boston, and I busted my ass to try to qualify for Boston. And within the first mile and a half, I was like, yeah, this is not happening. I still went for it. I think I finished in 3:31 or something, which was 15 minutes off the time, but I was in so much pain. I was like, I am never doing that shit again. And sure enough, you race an Ironman, you've got to run a marathon after riding your bike for 112 miles and swimming for 2.5. And then next thing you know, it's like, well, running a marathon wasn't, that bad. Let's do 4 of them in a row and run 100 milers and, 10x over the course of Cocodona. So like, your perceptions of these distances change over time, and what you're trying to get out of them, it has also, for me, has changed. Like originally, I did want to qualify for Boston. I wanted to run fast, and I'm telling you, I hated the training. I absolutely hated the training for Boston. It just felt like every day was another interval. Every day was another speed session. Every day was hard, it felt like. And I was like, this is awful. And then to be off by so many minutes, I was like, how am I going to figure out how to get 16 minutes off of this, 15 minutes off of this time? And I, started moving into other sports in the endurance sports world. And I say that as a lesson for people. Like, if you don't enjoy the thing that you're doing, go find something else. There are so many opportunities out there in endurance sports. If you like 5Ks and you want to be a 5K runner, go for it. Like, go do it. You don't have to do the other thing just because, Jane from Joplin, Missouri is on Strava giving you kudos for it. Like, you do the thing that you enjoy the most.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I also swore off marathon, and I think it's the race is one thing, right? But it's also the training for it, and it's just trail running is fun. And my training run when I go on trail, it's fun, and I have a good time, and I'm much less stressed. And the goal is very different. The goal is much more adventure, beautiful views, connecting with the community. Whereas marathon, it feel, and I understand that some people are seeking that, and I have no issue with that, but it's not for me, and it's perfecting it. You need to have like the perfect race, like the perfect, we're talking triathlon, the perfect transition and these things, bang, 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 bang. Now that I'm a trail and ultra runner, I was like, I'm at the aid station. If there's a cute dog, I'm going to play fetch with the dog, and that's okay. I know this is not the perfect transition, but I don't care. That's not what I'm seeking right now. But the stress of like running the perfect marathon was just not for me, and just kind of not great. But at the same time, I think we're in the same boat. Like, there's this running joke of the only reason you run ultramarathon is because you couldn't qualify for Boston. I'm like, well, it's not wrong, but it's not true, okay? Whatever. I don't think I would ever qualify for Boston if I could try. And we're roasting Brian because he's boosting his like Boston Marathon shirt, and he's very proud for anyone who's just listening. Well, guys.
It's like neon. So I got this. If you're just listening, I have a neon yellow Boston 2019 finisher shirt on, and so maybe that's why the conversation's been kind of directed towards Boston. Maybe
the image in his background is the sicko symbol too.
I think it's just Boston is such. When you stick to marathon, which is totally fine, and it's about perfecting it. I think Boston is such a common goal. Like, do you have a Boston qualifier? Have you run Boston? Like, that's kind of the thing. Whereas when you go in the 100 miler, I guess, it would be Western State or Hard Rock, but it always diversify a little bit. There's these key races that are a dream race for a lot of people, but it's all very different. Like a Zion 100 mile is very different than a Leadville, which is very different than a UTMB, which is very different than a Hard Rock. And all of these things feel very special, and you make your own goal. Like, finishing is enough. That's it. Whereas for Boston, it feels that they tell you what the goal is. Like, you got to run this fast, my dude. And then you run this fast, and they say, actually, for this year, you needed to be 3 minutes faster than the time we said. I'm very sorry about that, which is horrible. So I feel very sorry for anyone that has happened. But yeah, I don't know. Does it feel good?
I think the other thing about trail running, right, is we can pace people and go to these events and experience them with them and see so many different things. Whereas, like, if I'm going to pace Brian at Boston, I had to have qualified for it, right? I can't just run with him. Whereas if somebody says, hey, can you pace me at Ouray? Yeah, let's go do it. Let's go have some fun. Can you pace me at Leadville or wherever it might be? You can go do it and experience the event simultaneously in a way that you can't do at a marathon like Boston or even New York, for that matter, because there's qualifying times for that too. So I think it adds a little bit of a specialty to it in that sense, right, where you can have camaraderie with people because you can help them out, go through some really hard times. 100 milers, right? I mean, I know some of these elites are running them in 13, 14 hours, but the majority of people are 24 plus hours. So if you're spending 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours with somebody and there's peaks and valleys all over the place. There's just a magical connection with that person that you're with, that you're pacing and crewing, that doesn't ever leave. I remember a lot of, or all of the pacing gigs that I've had with people, from Ouray to Leadville to, oh gosh, what's that one in Georgia? Anyway, Cruel Jewel.
Cruel Jewel.
Yeah, and I remember them, and I remember them vividly, right? Where the only thing I remember from the Vegas Marathon was just being in a lot of pain at the finish line. And it's just, I just think it's two different worlds in that scenario.
I think I come from an old guard where I think like road running, half marathons, they were like the gateway to ultra marathons for me. I mean, back in the day, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there was way less races than there are today. I think there's a lot of people coming into the sport that haven't experienced the road scene, and not that they need to by any means, but it was just my path of getting to where I'm at now, because I've been in the space for a bit, and I was doing triathlon and all the road stuff as well there. I think, it's just a different way of getting to the end game where we all enjoy the trail now currently.
Yeah, and it's not the end game, right? Like, I understand some people do marathon and that's what they do and that's what they enjoy, and no hard feeling. It's not for me. It's only what we remember, because what I remember from my road running days at Chicago Marathon is, I think 1 mile in, you go under a bridge and every guy was peeing. That's what I remember from my road running days. Like, and I'm sure everyone who's run Chicago and is not in the front knows exactly what I'm talking about, and the river that it creates. Like, it's a little bit gross, but that's what I remember.
So in New York, you run across the Verrazano at the start, and the wind is, you're pretty high off the water, a couple hundred feet or something like that, and the wind is ripping sideways across the bridge. And so you want to be on the far right-hand side of the bridge, because you might get sprayed by the guys peeing off the bridge and the wind blowing it back across the bridge. So that, and you lose your hat.
Pro tip.
So you have to hold your hat and stuff your hat across the bridge, and then on the other side you could put your hat back on. Yeah. Pro tips. There you go, guys. That's the end of the show. Thanks for being here.
If you run the Philly Marathon, you run past the Schuylkill River at one point, and there is just a line of men peeing against the wall there too. So clearly there's a connection between all of these marathon events somewhere around the mile area or within a mile.
Yeah. I don't want to pretend that trail running is any better, because what I remember from Leadville is, if you run on the 6th Street, it's about half a mile, and then they were smart enough to put porta potty there because apparently people need to go early on. So it's a thing.
Then you hit the boulevard, and there's all these little headlamps in the trees, right? So
yes,
yeah. Jason, what do you got on the calendar for this year? What's going on for yourself? What does your running schedule look like?
For me personally, well, I guess as a company, Run Try Bike, we're going to be heading to Javelina.
Awesome.
In October with the folks over at Aravaipa. Again, the three of our partners, Lori, Ohm, and myself, are going to go out there and run the 100-miler. We'll get a tent and a canopy and everything else. So for those of you that are willing to come and hang out, put your gear under our tent, by all means you're invited. Years ago when I was racing Rocky, I've raced that distance 5 times, and I had a goal back then of breaking 19 hours. Like, if I could get across the finish line in 18:59:59, like, I'd be ecstatic. The closest I got was like 19:11, and so I've put my I've put my goal for Javelina at breaking 21 hours. 51 years old. I'll be a month or so away from being 52 at the time of the event. So I'm giving myself a couple of hours for aging up from Rocky at this point. So right now training is involving speed work, and a lot of hill work at this point, and eventually get into longer distances as the training goes along. But that's one thing that we're definitely going to be at. And then we're still poking around calendars to figure out, intermediate races in between, in preparation for that event.
I mean, before we dive any deeper, like, do you mind just telling people what Run Try Bike does?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So we are the premier voice of the everyday athlete. That's our tagline. We tell stories of everyday athletes, people who have dealt with alcohol and drug abuse, people who have potentially been sexually assaulted. We've had stories of people who have come out as being queer through our platform before they've even told friends and family. Just the obstacles, the everyday person, the person who's got a job, maybe parents to kids, obligations, but is still getting out there and doing it, right? Because the vast majority of the competitors in endurance sports are that, right? We're not getting paid as professional athletes to do this stuff. And there's tons of stories out there that when I launched the business 5 years ago now, I didn't see a lot of it. There was a lot of coverage of people on podiums and elite athletes, and that's what you really saw. And I was like, yeah, but the running group that I'm a part of, like, that's not being seen here, or the triathlon club that I was a member of, like, that's not being seen here. So I started this business to do just that. And I lost count, but we're somewhere around 400 stories told on our website. We have a podcast network with 9 shows, and I think that number is somewhere around 200 plus stories at this point now. And it's literally conversations like this. We chat with people, we bring them on, talk about the things that they've had to overcome, the obstacles, and we do that so that if there's a Jason who's in the Bronx today and he's hearing me on a show and he doesn't know that he can actually run a mile or 5 miles, might say to themselves, yeah, I could actually do that too because Jason did it, or because Simon did it, or because Brian did it. And they're a lot like me. And so we try to create as much inspiration and motivation through everyday athlete stories.
You started it 5 years ago, Jason, and where are you at now with it? Like, what's your outreach? I kind of know a bit about it. I've been featured in your platform before in a couple different entities, different connections, but just for our audience, what is your outreach now, and what kind of
So we have our website.
social media outlets are you using, I guess? Yeah.
Yep. So, and by the way, everything is at Run Try Mag. I've been in sales and marketing for 30 years, so let's keep it consistent. So everything we do is at Run Try Mag. Our website, we are on all the major social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Twitter. We just put up a Blue Sky account recently as well, and we're on TikTok as well. We have our newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks. We have a digital magazine that we produce every 2 months. And then we have our Everyday Athlete Podcast Network that we started on July 1st in 2024, which now has 9 shows hosted by a variety of different people with a variety of different topics and subjects. So some we have a Q&A scenario just like this, where it's an hour-ish long. We have our Food Fight Friday at the Aid Station with Adam Lee of Community Trail Running. That's a 12 to 15-minute show where we play the Fuck, Marry, Kill game, but it's eat, toss, or carry aid station food. We have What's in Your Earbuds with Ohm and Joe, who talk about music and the power of music and adding to the playlist. Our most recent show is Melanin MVP with Angela Hollowell, and she's talking to BIPOC female athletes, and again, as a way to inspire and motivate them to get involved in endurance sports, cycling, swimming, running, triathlon, that kind of stuff. So yeah, and then before I forget, we have Enduring Minds, which is a men's mental health, and it's one of my favorite shows because that's a topic that we as men tend to ignore, right? We can't show our feelings, we have to be hard, we have to be grinding all the time, and honestly, it's bullshit. Like, we have feelings, we have stresses, we have anxieties, and so we have the first 3 shows were introducing the hosts, Evan Birch, Ohm, and myself, and now we'll have guests coming on every 2 weeks, starting February 14th, actually. And every 2 weeks, we'll have men who are willing to come on the show and talk about, their mental health struggles and what they do through endurance sports to help them with it.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful message. We had the remote that had, I guess, similar kind of line of thought a little bit. I mean, we agree, like, but just saying, like, the specific episode was a little bit about that, and totally agree with you. I think, being a motivator myself, it's just that I feel like guys and girls, and it's stereotypical, so I don't necessarily agree with it, but like the type of motivation personality that you have will be different. And guys will be, don't be a little bitch, do hard stuff, be uncomfortable, go do the cold plunge, don't be a bitch, stay hard. And girl will be, you're beautiful the way you are. You don't feel bad. Run slower, run less. And like, I feel like both can benefit from listening a little bit more from each other and not necessarily be in denial. Like, we have feelings, we have shortcomings, and like guys sometimes need to understand that and not be closed in their bubble, because that's where it creates anxiety, depression, and then a feeling of isolation that can be very dangerous on the long term. And it's not. I don't know. I think the goal of life to some extent is to be happy. So sometimes it's good to address these problems. So glad you guys have a series on that, or a podcast, you said, I guess, or
it's a podcast,
whatever,
yeah.
like a format that is specifically dedicated to that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, for me personally, right? What I have found is that when I communicate and when I talk, the burdens get less. And what I have found is I get to be more creative, and I get to think differently in a more creative manner, where it's like, hey, why don't we do this and why don't we do that, versus like stuffing it all down and creating this stress area that my brain is focused on the stress and it's not focused on finding solutions. And now it's able to be more wide open. And by the way, it doesn't mean that it's easy to do. I wrote an article a couple of years ago about my disordered eating that happened during triathlon, and I wrote it and I saved it in the drafts of our website for months. I'd go back and tweak it, and I'd go back and tweak it, and I was like, I can't press publish on this. And then I finally got enough gumption and I pressed publish, but then I shut everything down. I was like, I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. I got to get away from it. Because I don't know what the backlash is going to be. And to my surprise, the backlash was, thank you for sharing this. And that wasn't just from women who have had eating disorders. It was from men saying, thank you for sharing this. And that realization, I was like, well, shit. Well, I can talk about my alcohol abuse now because that's something that happened. I've been divorced. I can talk about that because that's something that has happened to me. And maybe somebody can benefit from hearing that conversation. And then, one thing leads to another. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, I feel a lot more creative and I feel a lot more open because these burdens have been lifted off of my shoulders. And now we can do some fun shit. Like, let's go have some fun now because I'm not carrying this extra weight anymore.
Yeah, totally relatable.
Totally
Yeah, totally relatable. I had a was it Blogspot or something way back in the day, and I wrote a full article about sobriety and trying to find my way. And I mean, it was like new. I was like 3 months sober, and I was like talking like I had, I had fixed myself. Of course, hindsight's 2020, and I realized I was way far. I'm 8 years now, and I'm still working on it. So just to kind of clarify, obviously where I'm at. But interesting enough, I wrote it and I kind of like let it linger for a while and let it like just stir. And then I just hit send and I got a good response, obviously. I mean, it wasn't like hundreds of people reached out, but like 3 or 4 people reached out and they said, hey, thanks for sharing. Thanks for being open. Your story's relatable for me in this way or that way or some other way. And I was like, oh, you know what? It's not that bad. And then it just allowed me to be more open in the future with another story or another issue or other challenges that I have. Yeah. So similar.
Brother, you're dating us. First, we jumped into the Warriors from 1979. Now we're talking about Blogger.
And I'm sitting here being like, what the hell are they talking about?
Simon's Googling Blogspot right now. He's like, what the hell's Blogspot?
We're gonna have a Napster conversation and a MySpace conversation soon enough.
Although none of us download any music from Napster, right? That's probably illegal to do so, right?
It was then, that's for sure.
It was then, yeah.
So I have no clue what Napster is my summary.
I can't possibly still be around. There's no way.
There's no way, no.
No, I don't know. I guess I'm going to have to Google it right after
with
this
streaming
show.
stuff and Spotify and everything, like what's the need anymore?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, just you have Apple to download, right? I mean, isn't that
right?
Yeah, or anything, yeah. Whereas, I mean, I remember, guys, I'm going to pretend like I'm old, okay, just so I can relate to you guys. But I remember they would play the top song, like a top 6 song at 6 o'clock on the radio. And then I would run to like my cassette, like the A and B side. And I would wait for the one I like to like record. That I do remember. And then they would ruin it. That towards the end, they would say like, and this is top 5 or blah, 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 and top 4 is blah, blah, blah. It's like, guys, come on.
Yeah.
So,
old school Jason would remember this from Hot 97.1. It was like all the dance club because I'm an East Coaster.
Baby.
Yeah, I was an East Coaster, and man, the same thing. They had like the Friday night dance party show, and they do like Hot 97 over the top of it. You're like, you just ruined my song. I just recorded it. But...
You'd get your pen out, and you'd have to put it in the cassette to turn it.
The pencil, yeah.
Kids these days, they don't know how good they have it.
Yeah. It's funny because one of the parents on my daughter's volleyball team has a cassette look-alike phone cover for her cell phone, like a cell phone case for her phone, and it looks like a cassette. And I was trying to explain to my 13-year-old what it was, like what like she's just like looking at it all awkward, and I'm like, that's a cassette. It used to play music, and you had to spin this thing, and it was it's hard to explain if you don't know, if you've never seen one.
You better not get into the 8-track conversation. That thing was like a big ass cartridge, man.
I mean, people nowadays, my understanding is kids don't know like the floppy disk icon. They don't understand where it's
Yeah.
actually coming from.
Yep.
And when you think about it, it was 1 megabyte on something this big. Like, whoa, like, come on. Like, imagine just a USB stick that would have only 1 megabyte. Like, I trashed that right away. This is ridiculous. Like, it needs to be 1 terabyte nowadays. Yeah. So, wow.
Like all this stuff. Like, I mean, when we talk about being on the phone, like this is the way we talk about being on the phone, right? But right, exactly. Now people are like, this is how I get on the phone. And I'm like, what is this? You know,
to be
like,
honest, what I would say to that is like, you're still on the phone. That's like the weirdest thing ever. Like, if somebody calls me, I'm definitely not answering. Like, it's 99.9% of the time it's like fraud, and otherwise it's the government that might in trouble. So I don't want to pick it anyway. But
so
yeah,
ironically enough, we sent out a sales pitch and I didn't get a response. I emailed the point of contact, and then my phone rang, and it was from the state in which this entity was, and I was like, there's no way they're actually calling me back. Like, no way. And sure enough, and I talked to the guy, and he's like, look, I'm a little bit old school. If you need to get in touch with me, don't send me 17 emails. Pick up the phone and call me. And I was like, you're my guy, because that's how we do business. So I was like, you know, I've been calling him, and we've actually talked on the phone a number of times now too. So, you know, us old hats are still around. We're still doing business.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience with a guy from Texas to make a tent for myself, and we sent emails, and I was like, "Yeah, I want this for my tent. I want this back wall. I want this logo, yada yada." And it was just, you know, it was a bit of a much of an email conversation back and forth. And he said, "Hey, can I call you?" And I was like, "Yeah, man." And like speakerphone, 10 minutes, we settled the whole thing. You know, it was first name. We were like, "Thanks, buddy." You know, like hang up the phone. Like, all right. He called me up a couple days later. Told me the order was shipping. Never heard from him again. But it was a good old school style. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. Like I have a rule, right? If it's an exchange on email that is not terse or not combative, but you're not seeing eye to eye, after 3 emails, pick up the phone, because you will solve that problem in a matter of minutes instead of emailing for days or weeks on end.
I mean, I think Zoom is better than phone because it's nice to see the face, though.
Yeah, agreed.
So when it's work, like I do want to see someone's face, because I agree a lot is lost when it's just text. Like if it's on Slack or Teams or whatever people are using, or emails, and then it's like, okay, like let's just Zoom. But even better is in person. But in person is kind of not always
It's
possible.
hard.
But
It's
Yeah,
hard.
but Zoom is an old school. I think that's where that's the disconnect. Like old school is like an actual phone call, or like you see, I'm doing it. But Zoom,
we're
old school
like
is an
that,
actual
right?
phone.
You have
Yeah,
the
the
rotary
rotary
at
phone.
home, Brian? Is that what
Yes.
you're
Yeah. And like a 35-foot cord from the kitchen, and it went to every bedroom. It fit into every bedroom in the house, right?
I don't know if you had siblings, but I had a younger sister, and you'd be on the phone, you know, from the kitchen all the way to the bedroom, and they'd come running out of the bedroom, and they would just clothesline.
Oh, yeah, I was the one getting clotheslined. Yeah. Actually, we'll get back to it. Run, Try, Mag. I love that you guys are on all different platforms, and you kind of like have a diverse network of the way you're getting the information out. It's not all just podcasts. It's not all just blogs. It's kind of something for everybody. So you're meeting them where they find content, right? And I really appreciate that. I've noticed that from the get-go from you guys. You guys are always just in every little pot, and so you're reaching out to where people find it, as opposed to the other way around, where sometimes we just assume like, hey, I make this podcast, you must listen to it in your ears, because if you don't read something, you'll never see this podcast, right? I mean, or if you're a reader, you'll never see this podcast.
Yeah, and then the other part too is like, even with the podcast, there's the video component, right? So there's a YouTube channel plus the audio, which is different, and people consume media in different ways. Ohm is one of our business partners. He's 30 years old, right? So the way he consumes media is much different than myself at 51. Like, I'm used to reading a newspaper. So a newspaper or a magazine, television and radio is different. And so when you're trying to get your content into people's hands, or in their ears for this matter as well, you've got to be where they're at. And don't get me wrong, it's a lot of work. We're very fortunate that a lot of the platforms use a lot of similar type things. So if we're posting a video to YouTube Shorts, it's the same video that we can use on TikTok and on Instagram Reels without much hiccup, right? The one that I'm having the most trouble with right now is Blue Sky. Their videos are only allowed to be 59.59 seconds long. And so if you record something and it's 1:01 long, they won't allow it to upload. And it's like, I don't really want half a second out of this thing. Like, to hell with it. It's just going to be the written word on this post here, and we'll go from there. But otherwise, I think it's important to meet people where they're at. We actually get requests from people. They're like, can I get a physical copy of this magazine? Which they can. We can get them physical copies of the magazine. But that's one thing that surprises me often, because we always think the digital age and nobody's reading physical books or magazines or newspapers anymore. But we do get requests for those physical copies, and we're able to print them on demand and get them into their hands. Takes a week or so, but it still gets into their hands. And it's a cool thing to, as a person who worked in the magazine business and the newspaper business, to have somebody ask you for that. I find that pretty cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like for myself, I struggle a little bit because although like technically I can post on Instagram and I can post on YouTube Short, and I guess I could do TikTok also, I feel that the what picks up on these format is different. And like, yeah, I could do a 1 minute long short, but like that's not really what will work. Like it needs to be 30-second, and I can definitely tell the difference. And TikTok seems to be even shorter, and it needs to be catchy, and quite frankly I don't have the the attribute to make it happen. Like it's clear that some platform different things will pick up, and then I feel like, yeah, I'm still posting it, but like it's just because I have it. But if I would want to create content specifically for the platform, it would reach a different type of audience, but my content would need to be different, and that's where I don't have flexibility. I'm like, I'm a long form content. I can create short out of it. I'm not gonna do like catchy bullshit advice. Like it's not my stuff. And yeah, it's gonna take 15 minutes. If you want something short, I can give like a little something, but I really struggle with that. I feel attention spam is getting shorter and shorter on some of these platforms. Like I don't want to play that game, and maybe I should because I would reach more people, but I don't know. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Because the conversation you talked about, like some of that stuff is pretty deep. So how do you adapt to shorter content?
Yeah, so we're not going to overly edit things and create uber specific content, because there's just not enough hours in the day, to be honest with you. And so there will be moments where we see a TikTok video take off, and then the next day the next video crashes like a lead balloon, and that's going to happen. We understand that, and we test things out. So like on TikTok, we use cover photos on Instagram because of the way the feed lays out, and it looks cool when you have a cover photo so that people know what's coming. On TikTok, the cover photos don't work. Like people don't watch them when there's a cover photo because they want you to just, basically, to your point, come right out and start yelling at them about what's happening and catch their attention. And so there are some instances where we'll edit things down intentionally for TikTok specifically, and then we'll just use that everywhere else. And then other times, if we're doing it on Instagram, it's a minute long, minute and a half long. That's what it's going to be. And if people don't watch it on TikTok, that's okay. If they get the first 5 seconds and they're like, oh, this is interesting, and I'll hang out, cool. If they're like, yeah, whatever, and they move on, that's cool too.
I think you're spot on, though. You guys clearly have experience. I agree with the shouting within the first half second. Like you need to have something catchy visually and auditively for some of these platforms. It's like, I'm not a clown, man. Like,
exactly.
It's okay. Like, go watch something else.
Yeah, and that's the take that we have too, right? Like, we don't get into beefs and arguments with people. Like, if you get on there and you comment that I'm an asshole, that's cool. But the same 2 thumbs that you wrote that I'm an asshole, you could have used to scroll by. You could have used to mute me. You could have used to block me. Like, you didn't have to make this comment, and you're not going to get a response from me. Like, we're not going to engage in that.
That is super tangent. I so much agree with that, but not everyone agrees because it's good for views if you engage with haters. That's so clear. But that's just encouraging bad behavior. And like for me, trying to build a community that is positive, like engaging with haters is just going to encourage that. And sure, you get more views from that. Like, that's great. No, like, I'll ignore you. And like, if you comment on my YouTube video and I did not respond to you, I mean, maybe it's because I didn't see it, but most likely it's because like, dude, come on, man. Like, really?
Yep.
Like, come on, man. So, yeah.
We feel the same way. And when we have conversations with potential marketers and advertisers for our products and our brand, we tell them that, like, look, could our audience be 20,000 people on Instagram today? Absolutely. We could just get into it. We could drop our hot take or our unpopular opinion on certain things, but we don't do that because we want to have a positive connection with our community. And if I start dropping hot takes, then I got to respond, to the negative person or the take that's opposite of mine. And one, I just don't have the patience for it, man. I'm 51 years old. too old for this shit in a sense. Like, I just don't need to argue with you. And so we want to bring the positive component to the Run Try Bike community and have engaging conversations and fun conversations, right? Like, if you go to our Threads account, I'm the one who manages that account. That is me 100%. Some days I'm talking about running. Other days I'm talking about eating Pop-Tarts. Other days I'm talking about the Mets playing baseball. Like, the conversation, it's all over the place. And I say that because we are complex beings, right? Like, I remember I just told this story on another podcast where I was being asked by somebody about baseball. And I said to them, you do realize, like, I like other shit, right? Like, it's not just baseball. Like, I love finance and I love politics and I love cooking and I love food. And, like, let's talk about all these things. And I find that I get bored when I go to somebody's, especially on Threads, because it's the written word more so than the pictures. And every post is, I ran 6 miles today. I ran 4 miles today. I ran 100 miles. And I'm like, what else did you do? Right? Tell me something. And so we try to do that, is let people know, like, look, there are real human beings behind these accounts, and we have different things that we love to do. It's not just running or swimming and cycling. Like, we love to do a bunch of different things in addition to swimming, cycling, and running.
Yeah, jogging, power hiking, all of these things. Trail running,
strolling.
Kayaking.
Where do you see Run Try Mag in 1, 3, 5 years, Jason? Where do you think this goes?
I love to dream big, guys. Like, I wouldn't have started a business if I wanted to dream small, in all honesty. And so the company that I look at the most is a company called Meadowlark Media. Dan Lebitard and John Skipper, formerly of ESPN, started Meadowlark Media a number of years ago. And Dan Lebitard has been one of those people that I've always looked up to. I highly recommend listening to his South Beach Sessions podcast. Those conversations are really deep. I just listened to one with him and Baron Davis, who played at UCLA and played for the Clippers and the Knicks in the NBA. And it was such a good conversation. But anyway, my point is this: like, they have built the media empire in my mind that I want Run Try Bike to be, where people are like, hey, I've got a story to tell. Can I come on one of your shows to tell it? Hey, I've got this nonprofit I'm trying to raise money for. Can I come into your show and share it there? That kind of stuff. Like, I want to have the Meadowlark Media of endurance sports in being able to tell everyday athlete stories. I know people will often say, right, if I can help one person, then I feel great about myself. And I was asked a similar question by Adam Lee on Community Trail Running Podcast. And I first started to say, well, if I can help one person, I was like, Adam, that's bullshit. Like, I want to help millions of people. It's cool to help one person. For me, it's cooler to help millions of people. And so if millions of people walk away and they're like, man, that Run Try Bike story about Brian or about Simon or about A or B really impacted me. I want to go do X. I want to go do Y now. That, to me, is where I see us going through the various different mediums and storytelling platforms that we have. Angela Hollowell, she is a filmmaker. So I could see us getting into documentaries at some point with her and telling stories of everyday athletes through documentary storytelling and movies, that kind of stuff. Like, I know the Trail Running Film Fest just announced their 5 or 6 movies that are going to be premiering. And, like, my head started spinning already. I'm like, okay, Angela, let's go find the topic and find the person that we want to do a film about and see if we can get a story out there so that we can get that into the Trail Running Film Festival next year and that kind of stuff. So it's really big. Let's do big things. Let's chase our goals as big as they possibly can be dreamed of.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Hey, by the way, if you need a guy, I know a guy. That's the story. But it's a dream of mine that one day I would have a movie about myself that is not made by myself. So, but that's beside the point. But something that is touching me a little bit is the thing about helping one person. And I kind of agree, but also disagree with that, where, of course, if you could help 2 people instead of 1 person, yeah, you want to help 2 people. Like, the more you can help, the better. And like you say, 1 million, what if it's 500,000? Are you happy? Probably you would be happy. From my experience, I started my career very long time ago. Like, that's prehistorical Simon. I was a pharmacist. And as a pharmacist, you have patient, and then you help one person in front of you. You know, you have the mom that comes like Friday night with her baby that is crying, that is sick, and you help that person. And that is a very meaningful way of helping that one person. And then eventually I moved to research, and in research you feel like I can help like humanity holistically with the discovery I make. However, it's not like I saved one life. It's more like incrementally I helped a lot of people, but a little bit. I think I saw purpose in both. You know, when you help one person in front of you, it feels very meaningful and very real as a human interaction. At the same time, it feels like it's a drop in the ocean. Like it feels like, you know, you wash the dishes and immediately as soon as you're done, there's more dishes to do, right? Like it just keeps going. So helping one person felt that way, whereas helping like so many people felt so incremental. I was like, well, I don't necessarily feel that I did something good. Like I finished a day in the lab. Like, did I help people today? Like that's so abstract that it was a little bit harder to grasp a little bit. But I totally see where you're coming from, and wishing you
And
guys all the success in the world. One question I have for you guys: the challenge that I hear from what you're doing is telling everyday stories is nice, but it's harder to get attention from people. And it's easier, you know, if you do a documentary and you do it about Courtney winning, you know, Hard Rock and UTMB, and like that's how you reach millions of people. That's how you reach millions of you. If you do a documentary about random person, it's a little harder. And then you're like, well, you could find, let's say, a sobriety story that people can connect to. But if you really want to find like a very average person who's just running because of midlife crisis and they just did a run, finish mid pack, like it's hard to be as impactful. I feel it's hard to get the audience, and you have so much competition. You know, a lot of people are doing that. So how do you plan to differentiate?
well, I mean, that's a great question, and I would say the opposite too, right? So Courtney or Jim or whomever goes on, you know, a number of different podcasts and they're telling the same story on a number of different podcasts. Well, that's all competition for those people, right? They're competing in that space for that same attention span to get Courtney or whomever that is. For me, the way we look at this is when I tell Jane's story, I want Jane to share that story with her family and friends immediately because that domino connection is much closer than somebody listening to Courtney's story about Hard Rock or Leadville or any other event. And they're like, I haven't even run a mile yet. I don't know what the hell this Leadville 100 is. I have no idea what this, Uray 100 is or whatever that event that they're talking to her about, that she just broke another record, that she just beat the whole entire men's field. They haven't even taken their first step yet. They don't even know what shoes to buy. They don't know what shorts and that kind of stuff. And so I want to hit it closer to home, similar to the story you told about the pharmacist with the baby coming in as being a pharmacist. Like you're touching that person right then and there to help them in that moment, right? And I think that's what differentiates us is the mindset of we're going to help Jane tell her story so that she could share her story with her family and friends in her immediate vicinity, and then it spider webs out, right? And I'd like to go back to your point about the pharmacist and the research. In the pharmacist example, your distribution was N equals 1, right? Somebody had to come in order for you to help them. Whereas in the research, which is where I would put us, is we're pushing that information out. And we know that when the product hits the shelf and somebody buys it, that person has been helped, but there's a number of different people that are behind it that are being helped as well. So the baby stops crying because they bought the formula off the shelf. Well, that helps the parents that are there. That might help the neighbor who can now sleep because they don't hear the baby crying all the time. So there's that domino effect of the help in the story. And that's kind of how we see it. Because I just think that when we are able to be closer connected to each other, we have a better chance of having an impact.
I mean, I don't disagree with telling stories, right? I mean, obviously that's what we do here. So, so you don't need
Yeah.
to convince me. But I see the challenge of like I think our more popular episode have been with people that are recognized name. That's been pretty consistent for us, and I can see, you know, I do YouTube
100%.
movies, and the big YouTube movies, which one will they be? You know, it's gonna be Killian like doing Western State like 10 years ago, and now they're doing like The Chase with Cocodona, and of course that movie will do better because it's telling the story of Jeff Browning and all of these guys at the top and fighting for the win, as opposed to like my movie, who's just like a guy's that at some point I was like, I love you, Nora, and I fart in the camera. Like that's my movie. I think it's cute. My wife loved it and people laugh, but it's hard to get the traction. And I'm not against it. I'm just like genuinely curious how to differentiate because obviously it's not even a problem that we face. Like I wouldn't even call it a problem. More like it's an observation that I face.
I think the idea is what's your goal, right? Like, if you wanted to have the ESPN of YouTube videos, then yeah, you've got to bring the big people on to have those conversations, to get those eyeballs, to get the attention. There's no doubt about it, right? Because some of our most popular podcast episodes are when we've had Show Gray or Anthony Lee or Sandy Nypaver or Rach McBride on. It's clear, right? The data shows it, right? But I say this all the time, and I say this to our potential advertisers. I don't need to be a millionaire. I just don't want to eat ramen for the rest of my life. That's it, right? And so if I can do that, then I'm successful. I don't care how anybody else measures me. I'm successful. One thing I've been saying a lot lately is I want to be bank account stable and time rich as opposed to bank account rich and time poor. If I'm constantly chasing the dollar and I'm constantly trying to get more eyeballs and I'm constantly kind of trying to do all that stuff, the money will come in, but now I don't have time to spend it. I don't have time to use it. I don't have time to hang out with my loved ones because I got to constantly do that. So I think it just matters on what your end goal is. And for us, if we hit our goal, which we have set out, and when we do it, we'll be thrilled. We won't be millionaires, right? There's not extra commas in the bank account, and that's okay. But we will have time to go and do more things and hang out with more people and have more fun and more memories.
I really think that like the Chase story is probably going to get a lot of clicks. I mean, like the Jeff Browning, Coca-Cola last year's one, it's obviously going to get a lot of clicks and a lot of views and everything. But the Jane story that you're talking about, Jason, is way more relatable. Like, I can't relate to Jeff Browning. I mean, I guess I can because he is our age, but otherwise I can't relate to Jeff Browning, like in his ability to run at the front of the pack and that whole front of the pack story. Where Jane's story is way more relatable. It covers the masses a little bit better, even though I will probably watch both stories.
I think the other part too is I think we get myopic in what we see because we believe everybody is watching the Chase. I'll be honest with you. This is the first I've ever heard of it. Like, I have no idea what you guys were talking about until you talked about Jeff Browning and Coca-Cola. Like, I had no clue. And I think that's one of the things that tends to happen is because we're operating in these endurance sports events and we're participating in them and we're talking to each other and consuming all of that media, we believe everybody is. But there's a whole world outside of trail running, right? Endurance sports covers a whole lot of shit, from 5Ks to triathlons to swim-only events to cycling-only events, right? There's a whole world out there that's beyond just trail running or Coca-Cola for that matter. And so I have the belief that there is an audience for everybody's content. You just have to be consistent with it and showcase it and stick to what it is that you're good at doing. And the audience will show up for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think... Again, obviously we want to, like, we have the same. We want to tell, like, normal people's story. And, like, I even think my channel is a normal guy doing stuff and it's not a sobriety story or anything. I like running. So that's what I do, right? But I think when you're actually trying to reach people that are not in the niche of the sport, these big names actually do reach out more. Like, if a movie gets, like, 1 million view, 10 million view, these are not ultra runner for the most part. If I compare, like, to a channel like Jeff Peltier, a lot of the views he will get are people that just like, oh, pretty views. And then eventually they get hooked by, oh, like, running is something that is accessible. Whereas when it's very niche, and that's just the nature of the algorithm, it's going to send it and push it to people that are very much in the space a little bit. And it's hard to break free until it gets viral. And it's hard to get viral without the big names. And I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong, because obviously I'm doing the same thing. But it's just... I guess I'm warning, you know, that's just what I'm doing right now.
It's hard, right? It's hard. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm sitting here telling you, look, we do this and, you know, cash is flowing out of the sky and it's utopia and gold coins. It's hard. It is extremely hard to do this, but I would put it back on your lap. Then why are you talking to a guy like myself? And why isn't Jeff Browning on the show? Why isn't Killian on the show? Why isn't Courtney on the show? Why aren't those people on the show?
Mean, if they want to be on the show, they have an invitation.
They didn't reply to my email.
Yes,
they didn't reply to my
do
emails.
Have an invitation. But there is a key difference here, at least for me, okay? And I can talk more from like the my channel's perspective, and then doing the podcast with my friend, with Brian. Like, you know, I definitely don't do it for the money. Like, I'm losing money doing that. And I have absolutely zero intention that it will ever be profitable. It would be nice to break even. And that's why I started Patreon. Like, hey, it would be nice to not bleed money. But honestly, like, it's never going to be profitable. It's never going to reach the level where I can stop working and focusing on that. And that is not the goal, which does allow me the freedom of doing interviews with people. I was like, I don't think so many people will watch it, but I do think it's a worthwhile story to tell. Like, that's how I see it. But if I wanted to be like a little bit more viral, if I wanted these things, I would engage with haters. I would, like, have a sexy assistant that would do the first half second of every single TikTok video I would have. I would do these things because I know it would generate clicks, and it would generate clicks outside of the niche of the sports, which I am interested in bringing new people in. But mostly I feel that most of my channel, for example, the tips are more geared towards people that are at least starting to trail run and want to have a little bit more guidance. Like, I'm not what people will look up, like, it's the first thing they see a trail runner and they see Simon. I was like, I want to be like that guy. No, they look at Goggin, they look at these guys that just run crazy amounts, like, oh, I want to be tough like that. I want to be a tough guy. I'll do the same thing. And once they get injured and they start maturing a little bit about how you should train, how the community actually is supportive, and it's not about having the biggest dick, then it's like, hey, Simon is actually pretty spot on to the type of community that this is. And that's where they watch me. I lost a lot of audience by not tailoring my message to like the early space, and I'm okay with that. I think that's not necessarily the message that I'm trying to convey. But if I wanted the click to get ad revenue and these things, that's what I would do, and that's why I'm more curious about you, because it seems that even though you don't necessarily do it for the money, that is part of your revenue stream.
Oh yeah, no, we do it for money. Don't get me wrong, right? Like, we sell ad space. There's no doubt about it. We have marketing services. We definitely do it for the money. Again, it's because we don't want to eat ramen noodles. But our goal, when it's all said and done, is not millions of dollars. Like, that's not the thing for us. We think that we can do good storytelling and story sharing and make a living at it where we're comfortable with it. And you have to find some shortcuts here and there. You have to use free trials on certain things and maybe one level up on other things where, it's like $10 or whatever it is to help with some stuff. But what I have found is once you start connecting with people who are in different spaces within this content creator world, they are like, hey, have you tried this platform yet? Have you tried that platform yet? Let me connect you to this person. Let me connect you to that person. And then costs can start to shrink. And then, for us being in business, we're like, okay, if we sell an ad for X amount of dollars, what percentage of that ad can we dedicate to somebody writing a story for us or doing something else for us, where then we're saving our time? It's not profit in a sense, but now we have more time to go and find another deal. And it's just being more efficient, the whole work smarter, not harder thing. In that vein is what it looks like, and how do we work with different types of businesses to bring things in? And we purposefully look outside of the endurance sports space as well, right? So pick up the phone and call Nike, you might get a call back in 3 or 4 years, right? But if I call a local financial planner, they might have interest in a mid-read advertisement for them because they have licenses not just in California, but they can service people in Texas and Arizona, let's say, right? And they might be interested in a mid-show read for one of our podcast shows. And so you can find different ways to get creative with the product so that you can sell ad space and then use that money to, again, put some food on your table, but then also figure out how to outsource another piece so that you now have more time to do stuff.
Jason, just before we wrap it up, I wanted to I was on a blog, I want to say. I think I wrote a sobriety blog with Om and myself, and I think Simon was on a fireside chat, if I'm not mistaken. So besides those two as your favorite episodes, what is your other favorite episode that the people should go to Run Try Mag and go check out? One of your favorites over the 5 years. Maybe not your favorite because obviously it's mine and Simon's, but the third favorite.
The bronze position on the podium. Jennifer Comfort is one of my favorite people to have spoken to. We have an article on our website, runtrymag.com. She's been on our Fiery Ember show a couple of times as well. They're always fun conversations. She, like Simon and I were just bantering back and forth, like she and I will banter back and forth. She'll ask me questions. And so it makes it more of a conversation than a one-way speaking at. Mm-hmm. And I bring her name up too because she's one of the people who came back to me after we did the interview for her article on the website. And she said, I don't know where this fits into the story, but the reason I got into running, I told you, was because my friend died But what I didn't tell you is that friend was the only person who knew that I had been sexually assaulted. And so his death really, really impacted me. And that was a light bulb moment. Like, holy shit, somebody trusts me this much to tell that story. And so since then, we've had her on a couple of more lighthearted shows and cracking jokes. Like I always tell a story. Matt Damon went to Mars. When he was on Mars, he had to eat potatoes for the rest of his life or whatever. So I say, before you get in the spaceship with Matt Damon and you're going to eat potatoes for the rest of your life, what's your last meal? And she said to me, like after thinking about it, she goes, wheat thins. And I was like, of all the food in the world, like you could have had steak, potatoes, whatever you want. Wheat thins is your answer? And I cracked up laughing at that. And so we always have a good laugh with it. But Jennifer Comfort is in the number 3 spot behind you and Simon on our platform for sure.
I would say pineapple on pizza, but I don't know. I might have caught an episode or two here or there.
I'll watch you eat that. Dude, you lived in New York. You can't be eating that shit.
I don't eat pepperoni. My daughter eats pepperoni on pizza, but she's Colorado born, so she don't know. She don't know. Well, we appreciate your time. You mentioned runtrimag.com. That sounds like the hub of where we could find you at. And we'll watch all the shenanigans all year long up until I think we'll both see you at Javelina this year. I'll be volunteering.
Yeah, what's your costume?
So I've been thinking about, I can't remember the kid's name, but the movie Up, the little Cub Scout dude or Boy Scout, whatever he was, getting dressed up as him. And
who's going to be the grandpa?
I'll be by the end.
Yeah, maybe you're the grandpa and Ohm's the kid.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Actually, a shit ton of helium balloons might not be a bad idea out there.
Save on tripping on those hard rocks out there.
Yeah, for sure. It'll like insulate your fall so you don't get the cactus in your face like Tara.
Try my trip of not tripping. It works great. I know it sounds crazy, but try it. Don't fall. It works.
I'm going to write that tip on my hand. I'll write it on my hand as I'm running. Don't fall.
No falling. Yep.
Always a great conversation with you, Jason. I appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on, and we look forward to catching up to you soon.
You guys have been a blast. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks.